couldn't attend, they can attend with this they can attend later on with the recording. Okay, people are still coming in, but Tillman, take it away.
Thank you, Linda. It is a real honor and pleasure to be here with Il Chiastro family doing an iPhone workshop. My career as a photographer started back in newspapers. I was actually hired to shoot color photography, color photographs for a newspaper back when that was a rare thing in the late 70s, and did that for about a decade. Then I taught at main photographic workshops and worked on my MFA at the University of Delaware. And in the mid 90s, moved and taught at a private high school out in Utah for about 5 years. About 2001, my wife and family moved back to Maine and we started our workshop business. And I taught for a variety of different workshops around the country and several places in the world. And I was a large format photographer. I could pack 2 Pelican cases to 69 point whatever ounces, and it was exactly 70 pounds when they put the call tag on it. And that was a lot of work, and I was no fun to travel with because I was working. Gradually, equipment got smaller. My equipment got smaller. Started shooting digital about 2013, but was still shooting film. And in 2017, went totally digital with the Fuji GFX medium format series for most of my still life work and some landscape work. But I kept my eye on the iPhones and what they were doing. And what began to change my mind was a good friend of mine, Jim Richardson's a National Geographic photographer. And he did a story for National Geographic with an iPhone 5 that they printed in the National Geographic Explorer magazine. And I've known Jim for 40 years. So when he offered an iPhone class, I jumped in on it, and it changed the way I travel. This year, my wife and I went to Italy for almost 3 weeks, and the only thing I took was my iPad and my iPhone. And being a print guy, it always comes back to the print to me. You know, here's a print made from an iPhone and another one. And I've actually made platinum prints from these iPhone files. Now, I can't make large prints from them, but they're beautiful prints nonetheless. So it changed my opinion of what this tool is. And I think there's 2 things we really have to get our heads around when we're thinking about the iPhone as a camera. One, it is a real camera. 10 years ago, we would have paid thousands of dollars for the sensor and the resolution that we've got in this iPhone today. And secondly, the truth that's always been about photography is what's going on between your ears is far more important than what you've got in your hand. You can make phenomenal pictures with almost any camera. And this iPhone is always in your pocket. It's always available, and it's really exceptional. And one of the things to remember is the sensor in this iPhone is made by Sony, one of the major camera manufacturers in the world. I know several people who use the Sony system. Well, the sensor in the iPhone is the same sensor. So we have to approach it as a real camera. We have to think about what we're doing, and if we use it as a camera, all of our skills that we've trained for years as photographers to use, it can do phenomenal things. And Apple has put some very brilliant stuff in the software behind the scenes that make it do things that my Fuji GFX won't do. And we'll explore a lot of these different things in the full 6-week class. But there are a couple of talking points before I get into a sample of what we're going to cover is the lenses. These are, as I said, excellent. This is an excellent sensor, and it has superb lenses. If you have a basic iPhone, it'll only have one lens, and that's what they call their wide angle lens. And it's approximately what you see with both eyes. It's pretty close to what we see in our binocular vision. And I think that's why Apple has chosen to put it in there as their quote normal lens. For me, it's a little bit wide, but that's what they call a normal. Then as you get higher up in the Apple system, you'll get either 2 or 3 lenses. I have the Pro, the IMAX Pro, iPhone Pro, whatever it's called. It has 3 lenses. It has an ultra wide lens, which is extremely wide. It's about equal to a 13 millimeter lens on my 35 millimeter camera. And it has what they call their telephoto, which is equal to about a 50 millimeter lens on a 35 millimeter camera. So I've got super wide, fairly normal, and then a slightly longer than normal lens right there on the back of my camera. So they're excellent lenses. Another conversation that I get, people ask me, and oh, do I need to upgrade? I've only got a 12 megapixel. And the iPhone now, the newest one, do I need to spend $1,500, $1,200 to get the 48 megapixel camera in it? And it's a multiple answer. If you're going to be making big prints and you're going to be photographing in bright light all the time, you'll get the full advantage of the 48 megapixel sensor. If you're going to be working in a variety of light, and you're not going to be making extremely large prints, it's not necessary. Essentially what Sony did was, in a 12 megapixel sensor, there are 12 million light receiving pixels. And the RGB array there puts filters. There's red, green, and blue filters over each sensor. There's 2 green for every red and blue. So this is what the information they use to create the image. What Sony has managed to do somehow is they've managed to put an RGB array on this minuscule pixel. So each pixel becomes, in essence, 4 pixels in one. So it's amazing technology. Unless you're photographing in very clean, bright light, the camera is going to come down to 12 megapixels anyway. And most of the time, what you will export, if you're shooting in RAW, is a 12 megapixel file. So you don't have to spend the money. I'm using my 11 and will continue to use it for a little while longer. So it's not essential to go up to the 14. But if you're working on an iPhone 8 or 9, maybe a 10, you might want to think about jumping up to the 12 or 13 to get that full 12 megapixel, or even a 48 on the 14 sensor, to get the 48 megapixel sensor on the iPhone 14 Pro. But that's a lot of money for a phone and a camera. So it's based on how you're going to use it. If the only thing you're going to do is share it on social media, Facebook, Instagram, 12 megapixel is plenty. It's more than enough. The third thing people always ask me about is RAW, JPEG, HEIC. JPEG is the oldest digital picture format that we have, and it came about 30 some odd years ago as a uniform way of transferring images on the internet. The files are not too big, and they work on a simple sRGB system, and it's universally accepted. Anybody can open a JPEG or send a JPEG to almost every photographic system. Apple created their HEIC, which is High Efficiency Image Container mode. Those files are about half the size of a JPEG, but they hold about twice as much information. So somehow Apple has managed to take all the information in a JPEG and put it in a smaller file so that it takes up less space on our phone. JPEGs and HEIC images are like the old Kodachromes we used to shoot. You couldn't do much manipulation to them. If you exposed it properly, you made a beautiful chrome. If you overexposed it, it was washed out. If you underexposed it, it was dark. You can do some of this. You can do some editing with HEIC and JPEG images, but not as much. The RAW file, this is a new thing with Apple. It's in the 13 and the 14 and I think the 13. That's the same. It's a DNG file. It's the same sort of file that you capture in your mirrorless or your DSLR. It's a full-size file. It's got all the information. It's got all the editing possibilities. You've got full highlight detail and full shadow detail that's captured in that file. However, when you shoot RAW, Apple is expecting you to make all the decisions on color balance, light temperature, all of the things. It's not going to make any of those decisions for you. It's going to say, here's all the information, make of it what you will. So again, it comes back to how you're going to use it. If I'm going out and I know I'm going out to photograph and I want to make prints of what I'm shooting, I'm going to work in RAW because I want that full spectrum. If I'm just shooting, hey, look at my pup and I'm going to post it on Instagram, I'm going to use Apple's HEIC mode to save the space and to make it readily available. It's got a great color space. It looks great. And the engineering in there does a great job of light balancing it. The RAW file will be about 10 times the size of the HEIC file. So it will take up a lot of space either on your phone or on your cloud. If you're in the Apple world, it's going to fill up a lot of space. So
Is it a good time to stop for a question here?
that's exactly where I was headed. Thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead, Denise.
Okay, great. So I think the first question, Vince is asking a question, but I think you might have answered it when you said that the technology is just really amazing, because what he is asking is, how could the sensor in iPhone be the same as a Sony camera? The sensor size is drastically smaller. I think you covered that by the...
It's not the same. It's made by Sony, and it's probably a quarter the size of what's in the Sony full frame camera. I don't have the exact dimensions, but it's the sensor made by Sony, but it's maybe the size of my thumbnail in actuality. So it is a small sensor. So it's never going to replace what you can do with either a full frame or a DSLR or my medium format. But I do find it to be about equivalent to a good 35 millimeter camera. So if I'm used to shooting with a 35, the file size is pretty close, is acceptable for that.
Okay, great. And Tammy's wondering if you have any recommendations for attachments for those of us with only 2 lenses on our phone. So they have the telephoto option.
Yes. There are.
Is that in the class? Is that in the class?
That's in the class. We're going to go
It's
over
in
it
the class.
extensively in week 5 in the class. But the short answer is there are 2 basic ways to do it. One is a clip-on lens that clips onto the back, and they're about $20 for a full set of 3 or 4 different lenses. It's okay. It's not great. If you're a photographer and you're used to the lens quality of a good camera and a good lens, you're not going to be happy with it. The other option is made by Moment Lenses, and it is an actual lens. It's an actual optical piece of glass. This is their 58 telephoto. So it doubles the focal length of my telephoto lens, and it doubles the focal length of the normal lens. I can't use it on the wide angle lens. But to use this, you actually have to buy a case from MoMA, and the lens fits on it like that. It's very good optics. It does a good job. But yes, so you can get, if your camera just has 1 or 2 lenses, you can get other. For Christmas, I got a macro lens, which is a 10x macro, and I got a super wide that's very high quality. And these lenses are good optical glass, and they're well made. So if you're a photographer, that's the direction I would go.
We have one more, and then we're going to move on to the next section.
Okay.
Sure. So Robert is asking, you mentioned traveling with an iPad. What photo management do you use on the road? He uses his iPad. He used his iPad in Italy last October, but didn't like working with Adobe Lightroom Express. He prefers Lightroom Classic. Thoughts?
You have to use the Lightroom mobile for one. I start out in the Apple editing program. Snapseed is another good mobile editing program. It only works on the iPhone or the iPad. It doesn't work on the desktop. And then I set up my Lightroom Classic back here in Maine. So everything I shot went to the cloud and was downloaded into a file here on my desktop computer. So when I came home, I had 5,000 more images in my desktop computer from my iPhone. And so I could go into full Lightroom Classic and work on them there. Lightroom Mobile is a slimmed down version of Lightroom. It'll do a lot, but it's not exactly the same. But there's nothing equal. First, there's nothing equal to what you will get out of a full-size camera, and there's nothing equal to what you will get out of the full-size computer. But you're also carrying a phone, so your expectations have to be in accordance. Snapseed is a program I'll demonstrate a little bit of later this evening. That is a simple on-the-fly application that has a lot of editing options that is not as complex as Lightroom. It's owned by Google, it's free, and it exports a file.
All right, good.
Okay.
On to the, yeah.
All right. In week 1 of the class, we're going to go over every setting, every option, and everything in the iPhone. I'm going to try to share my screen here, and we'll see whether my phone shows up. Come on.
It'll do it. I know it.
There we go. All right. Now you're seeing my iPhone screen. Can everybody see? All right, down at the bottom. Wow. Actually, can you see the top of my phone? I can't see it because of what's.
No,
I'm gonna.
we see the.
Do you see the full screen?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Up in the top right-hand corner, there's a bullseye-looking thing.
All right. No, we can't see that. We can't see any of your those things.
No,
Oh, wait a minute.
can
I'm
see
sorry.
it.
Yes, we
You
can. Yes, we can.
Yeah,
I'm
we can.
sorry.
You can see it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought that was
Okay.
my thing. Sorry. Yes, we do. All right.
Okay.
Ignore the woman.
That's Apple's live photo, and this causes a lot of confusion. It's actually a short video, and it allows you to do some things with the file. You have three or four options to do with the file. So I'm going to get my little Buddha here bouncing. We'll fall all the way off. Come on, Buddha. There we go. I'm going to get in close, and I'm going to take a live photograph of him. Now, when he comes up in the editing sequence, see this live button up here at the top where it says live with the arrow down? If I touch there, I can play that image as a loop where Buddha's head is going to keep bouncing over and over and over. I can bounce it where it's going to go back and forth. Or I can create a long exposure where it blurs. So whereas for me, where this is really important and was what I've enjoyed is when I go, I'm going to try to go to my iPad now. There's my iPad. All right, so let's look at this image. This is the Camden Falls here in Maine, in Camden. The picture I would like to make is that. That's what I would take my camera and I'd put it on a tripod and create that long exposure so I get that silky smooth water. I always wondered how to do that with an iPhone. And here I can do it very easily. Again, I have the choice of loop, bounce, or long exposure. I'm going to choose the long exposure. Where would I want to use bounce? Well, it might be in this loop section here where Iggy is walking across the board endlessly back and forth. I think loop and bounce were created for the Instagram where it's constantly going on and on and on and on. So you can turn that on and off. You can, if you touch the bullseye up in the corner, that will turn live off. If you touch it, it will turn it back on. I always have it off unless I know I want to do a long exposure, because it's not as high a grade image. You know, it's again, a small movie that it's blurring, so the file is not going to be as good or as large, but it's the only way in broad daylight to get that long shutter speed exposure that I like. So it's up there in the top corner. It's the little button. If you touch it, it'll turn off. If you touch it, it'll turn on. All right. Now the portrait, back and forth. Sorry, folks. We'll see whether this. Here comes the phone again. Now, the second, there are half a dozen different camera options in here, but the next one I get the most questions about is portrait mode. And you can see it's telling me to move further away. This is using the actual optic lenses in your phone. It's not zooming, it's not cropping it. You notice I can't expand with my fingers or to change the way it's looking like you can in photo mode. It's using the optics of the lens. So it's going to want to be somewhere between 4 and 7 feet away, what Apple considers a good portrait distance, close enough to basically reach out and touch your subject. It only works in those. So back to the iPad. There we go. All right, this is my friend Dan Smith. One of the really, really neat things about portrait mode is when you go to edit, touch up to the edit, you see up at the top something you don't see in any other edit screen. It says f4.5. Now this is made with whatever, there's no actual aperture in an Apple iPhone. Using computational analysis. I love that. That allows me to go in and change the depth of field. I can either completely blur the background. Look at his shoulder in the background. This would be about f1.4. See how soft it is? When I come down to f4.5, it's beginning to get distinct. When I get all the way to f16, I actually begin to see some of the cracks in the wall behind him. The portrait mode with the iPhone is the only way you can actually change the depth of field after you make the photograph. That's pretty slick. That's some pretty serious math that they've got going on there to allow me to do that. But it requires me to be within this 4 to 8 feet distance of my subject. And that's why they call it the portrait mode. It's using the best lens and allowing me to do that sort of depth of field. A lot of people talk about the bokeh. That's the background, the way the background is drawn in the out of focus areas. Somehow they figured out that, okay, well, how much depth of field do I want on his shoulder? We'll say about there, f8. And there he comes in. That's one of the unique features in the Apple portrait mode. On the other, you see these series of buttons on the right-hand side. They've got some built-in. This is the natural light. If I slide my finger, they now put a stage light effect. They change the lighting effect there. Now they've dropped the background completely out. Now they've made it black and white. And now it's gone to a high key. So in this one portrait mode, I can not only adjust the f-stop, I can actually create studio lighting with it. Some pretty interesting computational analysis. And those are just two of the things that the phone can do in its working. And you've got to work within the limitations that Apple has created, but it's very good. It works very, very well. So time allows you, live allows you to create a long exposure, and portrait allows you to adjust the f-stop. And I will give you a quick warning, and I don't know how it does it or why it does it. But when you have it on live and tap the picture, it actually starts recording just before you touch the button. So make sure you're not pointing your phone at something you don't want the world to see. And be very careful about the way you do it. And so that tells me that Apple's got the phone recording everything, whether it's remembering it or not. But in live, that's how you create long shutter speed.
Tillman, quick question. So could you show Patricia one more time where
Sure.
you find that long exposure, how to change it
Sure.
to long exposure? And while
Sure.
you're doing that, Robin is asking, if you know this, her phone continues to turn the live on, even though she turns it off in the back end, like automatically. Is there a way to turn that off?
It's in this, it's buried in the settings menu. Week 1, full class. If you go to the camera settings in camera, you can turn it off, turn it on. I'll see if I can find it quickly in just a second. But to make a live only way, okay, the photo has to be taken in live mode. And then see up here, this little lozenge looking thing in the upper left-hand corner of the frame where it says long exposure. It will say live up there. And it will give you the little bullseye symbol. And that tells you that photograph was made in live mode. This only works in live mode. Then you touch on that, open the menu below it, and go to long exposure, and it blends all of those together. If you haven't held the camera steady, then what's in the background is going to be blurry as well. So again, if you're doing this kind of long exposure, put it on a monopod or a tripod if possible. If not, just hold it pretty steady. Okay. Settings. Camera. Preserve settings. See where it says live photo setting rather than automatically. So if you turn that on, slide it to the green, and then turn your live off, it will stay off. Does that make sense?
Perfect. And I know you'll be going through this in the first class too. True?
Yeah, I've got, we'll go through every setting, every option and that sort of thing.
Tillman, I don't get it. What do you mean? You've got live photo and it's on? Yeah?
Yeah. And then if you touch it, it goes off.
Yeah.
The arrow goes through it. Now, when you take another picture, it's probably going to go back to being on live mode is its default. That's where it wants to be.
Okay.
If you don't want it on, you have to go to in settings, go to the camera, and it says live photo.
And then you turn it off.
Well, it says preserve the live photo setting rather than automatically reset to live photo. So if you slide that to green and you have turned it off, it will stay off.
Unless you turn it on manually here
Unless you
or
turn
there.
it on your screen. You can always, turn it on or off on your screen.
You can always turn it on from your screen. I see.
My assistant has just insisted on joining us. All right. So all right. So that's week 1. We're going to go dive into the camera and all its options and all the variables like pano and slow motion and time lapse. And we'll go into the settings and figure out which are the better settings to keep it on or off. So the camera works the way we want it to do in that mode. All right. The next week, we're going to talk about editing. Oops. Go back to settings. In editing, in the Apple editing menu, there are about 9 options. And editing a digital file is what I like to think of as a circular process. You make one change, or you work your way all the way through the menus. And then you may have to go back in something you set somewhere early because other things affected it more or less. But the first place to start is always with auto. And I don't know whether you can see the subtle changes that made, but it just that's it off. There it is. See how it brightened that up a little bit? So I always go to auto first and see what it does before I dig in and start making any other changes. Then I'll go down brightness. There it is. There's brightness. Brightness is what I call smart brilliance. Brilliance and brightness do similar things. Brilliance is a larger overall. Brightness is more locally. See how that's making some small changes in there? So I'll do auto, and then I'll go to brightness, and then vibrance. If I want to change in the color cameras, there's saturation, which if I desaturate it, makes it all the way black and white, or if it totally saturates the color in there. And then there is vibrance. And vibrance is kind of smart saturation. I can't take all the color completely out of it. See, there's still some color left in it. So I will work with the vibrance rather than the saturation and work on that a little bit, just to try to see how that's changing the color of that white lighthouse. And then the last thing I might do is I might work a little bit with the temperature, warm it up or cool it down. I'm just slightly increasing the warmth. It still feels like a snowy day, but I've warmed up. The lighthouse is not as blue. See how that's going? And everybody's screen's going to be looking a little different. And this is where the digital world gets crazy. My screen is not calibrated to yours, but I can warm that up pretty much like that. It's completely different on my iPad than what it is on my computer screen. But as I change the warmth, I can warm it up or cool it down with that simple thing. So those four things, auto, brightness, vibrance, and temperature. If you work with those four rather than worrying about all 9 or 10 of them, you will probably get yourself pretty close to where you want to go. And unfortunately, in the Apple suite of editing, everything is global. There's no way to go in and affect one piece or part of a picture like you can in a more complex editing suite like Lightroom or Photoshop. I can't mask something and brighten it or darken it. I can't dodge and burn any of that sort of stuff in the Apple suite. I can only do global changes. So the second program I use is Snapseed. This is a free program by Google. No, that's not the image I wanted, sorry. Come on, open. There we go. From device, albums. Okay. This is my friend Craig. Shot in a restaurant, sitting across the table having lunch. Now, Snapseed, when I open that up, you see 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, almost 30 different options. And in each one of these menus, there's anywhere from 3 or 4 to a dozen options that you can change. This program allows you to go in and burn and dodge, to change the color temperature, to crop, to tilt, to shift, to expand. You can add grain to it. You can make it look like an old-fashioned photograph. You can convert it to a dozen different versions of black and white. that are presets that they have in it. But one thing it doesn't do that any other program I've seen does is if I go to head pose, oops, I can't find it. So I will cancel that. I will go back and I will crop it. And down here at the bottom, I've got a whole bunch of perspectives. So I'm going to go square. Click OK. Now let's see if it can find a head pose. It found it. Now, the nice thing I can do in this program, I can make him smile. Or I can make him really unhappy with the work I turned in. Never seen a program that does that. I'm sure Photoshop and some of the others may do it. But to swipe my finger across the screen, I can create. Oh, he loved all the work I turned in this week. Or not. So this is one of the apps we will look at. This is Snapseed. It's free. It's downloadable by Google. And it's pretty potent. And then you will export it back into your catalog, and it's right there. And it works on both raw images, HEIC images, and JPEGs. However you shoot it, this will work on it.
Is this a good time to ask a couple more questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. So first, there's no name, but Artist iPad is asking, where do you access shooting in RAW?
It depends on the phone that you have or iPad that you have. If you have I think it first came out in 13 and it's in 14. It will be, again, in settings, under camera, formats. So I have two, high efficiency and most compatible. High efficiency is the HEIC version. Most compatible is a JPEG. My iPhone 11 doesn't have RAW capability unless I'm using another program to operate the camera. The iPhone 13 or 14, RAW would be right in here. You would have a choice of RAW, HEIC, or most compatible, which is JPEG.
Okay, great.
So it's in camera, under settings, there. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So there are two questions that seem similar to me, so I'm going to ask them back to back.
Okay.
So Vince is asking, is there a way to have all images adjusted with auto setting as with a batch of photos, or sync the settings of a batch of photos using one image? And then Cindy's asking, can you edit multiple images at once or save the last edit to use on another image?
Not in the Apple native program that I know of. You may be, my answer that I have not been able to figure out a way to do that. That's a different computational power than what the Apple has. That's a Lightroom, particularly a Lightroom mobile that, it's a little bit much bigger, more powerful program that you can edit with. I don't know how to do batch processing like that in the Apple program. Snapseed, I don't know whether you can do it that way or not either. I don't do a lot of batch processing. I tend to process images one by one. So I don't have a absolute total answer, but my guess is in Snapseed, I've not seen that in Snapseed either, but so it would be one of the more powerful programs like Lightroom or Photoshop Online.
Okay, great. That's it for now.
Okay. All right. Okay. The next week, we're going to talk about composition and design. And in your settings, again, in your camera, you have grid. This is the rule of third grid. And I'm going to turn it on, and you're just going to see what the back of my office. See these lines in there, the tic-tac-toe looking board? That's the classic rule of thirds designation. And if in photographing, if you want to make something deadly dull, put it in that center block. This is not tic-tac-toe. You want to make a boring portrait, put somebody's face right in the middle of that block. you want to make it interesting, put their eyes up on the upper third. If you want to make a landscape, put the horizon line above or below either the top or bottom thirds. So back to pictures, back to there. Here we go. This is early morning, looking out at Devilly, looking back into the horizon. Here we've got the rule. If we apply the rule of thirds, I think I can get it to show up. If I hit edit, then crop. There we go. There's your rule of thirds. Just showing up briefly right there. So I put the pool on the lower half, and then I have lines going back, leading you back to the bright sunlight in the distance. So it's those layers of lines are adding some depth. So by keeping those lines on the grid in my viewfinder when I'm shooting, it allows me to recognize what I'm doing with the image and to stack it up that way. So we'll talk about another thing in composition and design is vantage point. Where are you making your picture from? The most 99% of the photographs in the world are made from a window, probably somewhere between 4'6" and 6'6", because that's eye level for most of us, somewhere in that window. So we're all walking around with our phone, looking at it this way. Find a different vantage point. Climb to the top of the Duomo and look over Florence. It's worth the climb. It's an interesting image. It's a different vantage point. And we're going to talk about different vantage points in week 2. And we're going to talk about the composition and the way we can use composition to change, to lead our viewers where we want them to go and what we want them to see. Any questions? I mean, that was pretty simple. To get to the grid, it's in your settings, camera, turn on the grid. I always keep that grid on. That's the reminder. Yo, dummy, pay attention to where things are in your frame. We're going to talk about light. And the rule is, if you've got good light, you'll make good pictures. That's why people are out late in the evening. That's why people are out photographing early in the morning. And sometimes even the night. So you want to pay attention and be very, very sensitive to the light that you're photographing in. And we'll talk about active light and passive light, the qualities of light that we can find, how to use window light for portraits, how to use them for still lifes. Simple still life shot by window light. It's in what I call my square foot studio. And if I were to edit it, I would go in, see what auto, I don't think auto is going to do. Well, I'm going to go, this I will go to shadows. I want that background to be darker, so I'm going to bring those shadows way down. So that's where I'm just using the shadow slider, and it takes it all the way down. But it's the window light. That's just a dying daffodil in a small vase with a simple black backdrop using window light. That's all it is. And one control in the editing. So light, we will study and we'll want to talk about light and what kind of light we're working in and understanding the difference between active light and passive light. Active light is just what it is. You know where the light source is. It gives you shadows. It gives you texture. Passive light is very round and doesn't particularly give you texture. It gives you smoothness. This is the way photographers that are photographing rocks make it look like skin. They're working on a cloudy day. They're creating some shade, wrapping that light around their subject. Okay. Any questions on light?
Not right now, but if anyone has a question, please put it in the chat.
All righty. The 5th week, we're going to talk about different apps these are different applications that you can use in your phone to make your images look different. This is an app by Hipstamatic called Tintype. And it actually, somehow they've captured the curve to make the image look like what it would be if I'd shot it with an old-fashioned Tintype. Now, this is just on the street. I don't know where this guy was going. I don't know what he was doing, but I thought it was pretty neat. It was one of my favorite images from Florence that week. But it was made with the Hipstamatic Tintype app. And Hipstamatic is a whole universe of lenses and film simulations that you can purchase for minimal and then use. And this is also a Hipstamatic app. This is the best digital pinhole app. I used to shoot a lot of pinhole with film, 8x10, 5x7. This is the Hipstamatic pinhole app. And I can shoot it with all 3 lenses on my camera. I just select which lens I want to use, and it generates an image. It is, like I said, the best pinhole app that I've ever found in the digital world. Even those that I could buy and put on the front of my camera do not work as well as this. We'll talk about some of the other apps. One of the other things that we will talk about is the apps that actually control your camera. And again, forgive me, you're just looking at my desk. This is the Halide app, which has a lot of options, but the Halide app is how I shoot RAW with my iPhone 11. I have to go into it and I can go HEIC, RAW. I can do either one. And on this, it only has one lens, so it'll only allow me to do RAW. And it will allow me to either shoot RAW, HEIC, or both. And I can make 2 copies of that image. Lightroom has its own app, has its own camera app. See down here at the bottom right-hand corner, the little camera there. There's my Lightroom camera. I've got exposure. I can go in and change. This is where I can control exposure, white balance. I can do automatic, professional, and high dynamic range. This is where a program is using the sensor and the lens to create the images. If I shoot in Lightroom, it automatically goes into my Lightroom catalog, Lightroom mobile catalog. And again, up here at the top, I have a choice of DNG or JPEG. I can shoot either one. So we'll talk about some or all of it. We'll talk about a bunch of these different options in that week 5 as we're going through. Some are free, some have a little bit of, some will have a charge, and a few will have an annual charge, annual fee to use. But that's how you would shoot RAW on an iPhone that's not a 13 or 14. You would have to use either the Lightroom camera or the Halide camera app and tell it that you want to shoot RAW, and then it will still go into your photos. And here's a whole RAW file of images that I have shot in RAW with one of these apps. So those are full 12 megapixel files that actually come out as almost 30 megapixel files when I start working on them. So it captures as a RAW file and actually sticks it in its own folder here in the photo app. And then the last week, we'll talk about putting all of this together, creating a short picture story, creating something for Instagram, and how we would use photos or how we would print them, how you would go to printing them from there. So, any questions?
There aren't really any questions, but Robert is saying that he has a hard time navigating through Hipstamatic. And every time he uses it, it feels like everything is random. But is that something you'll be going through?
Well, that is what Hipstamatic says is a positive and I say is a negative. Yes, it's designed so that every time you shake your camera, it creates a new lens and film combination. You can turn that off. So you can select the lens and film type that you want to use. And I just use one or two of them. And this was the picture of Craig shot with the Hipstamatic dry plate look. But there is a way in the Hipstamatic program to go in and turn that off. It is very frustrating to think you're getting one thing and get something else with the Hipstamatic. No question. Very, very frustrating. And the Hipstamatic images are JPEG, or they're small files. They're not very big files.
Great. And Janine has a question about when you were talking about editing.
Yep.
You said to only bother with 4 of the options, not all 12. One was warmth. And could you just quickly mention what the other 3 are?
Well, I didn't mean to say only use 4, but start with automatic. See what that does. Then I would use brilliance. Hang on. I'm sorry, brightness. I use brightness rather than brilliance, vibrance rather than saturation, and then tone, image tone, warmth or coolness. I think they call it, well, what do they call it?
Temperature.
They call it warmth. They call it warmth. Here on Craig, you can see I can actually make it look almost like a sepia tone, or I can make it look like a selenium tone. So warmth, it's going to make it either yellow or blue. Temperature is going to go the other two other colors. So those are the ones I start with. But it's very common for me to go through every one and make slight adjustments. And that's why I was talking about it being circular. You make one change, it affects everything else down the line, and you keep working your way back and forth, tweaking it until you get it looking the way you want it to look.
Great. So Patricia's asking about the course. So I'm going to put the link to the workshop, the 6-week workshop in the chat. So if you have questions about that, you can just hop over to that and see all the details, the dates and everything that you need to know. Let's hold on. So
and Robert had one more question too. Robert had a question about the, did they carry over?
What do you mean?
Yes, I see it. Sorry, I did. Someone asked me another question before. I'm sorry about that. Right. So the class is focusing on iPhone. Have you shot with any other phones like Samsung or Android?
I have not shot, but I've had people in class that have had them, and I've done a little bit of research on them. They're pretty similar. The names of parts of the programming may be a little bit different, and some of the Hipstamatic apps only work with iPhones, but there are some similar apps that work with the Samsung phones and things like that. Snapseed works on all programs. Lightroom will work with all of them. Halide, I'm not sure whether it works with the Samsung phones or not.
Right. And Robert is asking, do the Apple and Snapseed edits carry over into Lightroom?
Thank you. You have a choice. You export them, and then you can tell it will go back into your photos. And then from there, you can either put it into Lightroom or you can tell it where you want it to go, basically. So when you export it out of Snapseed, do we have any more questions?
There's one more. Have you used your iPhone images with alternative process prints?
I made 6 platinum prints the other day. Hang on just a second, and I'll grab one.
We also have a lot of people saying, thank you. This is great information. Really enjoying this, Tillman. Really getting a lot of great information from what you're sharing. Looking forward to the class.
Hold on, I'm gonna spotlight you, and I'm gonna have to take you off of the
okay, stop sharing.
Hold on 1 second. There you go. And where are you? There you are. Okay.
That's a little over 8x10 platinum print. Made from an iPhone. And there's the platinum print that you saw the inkjet version of earlier. So yes, the files, if shot in RAW, are large enough to make a 10x13 print at 300 DPI. So yeah, if you shoot it raw with the sensor, the 12 megapixel sensor, I can make acceptable platinum prints from those files. So that for me is a real game changer.
Excellent. I just want to remind everyone, because I know there's some questions. The classes are every week, starting on the same day. What day is today? Thursday? Wednesday? Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern every week for the next 6 weeks. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, you might want to take the class. We will send you a recording, and all the classes will be recorded. We'll send you this recording also with Tillman is lovely enough to send notes from this class too, for you to have. And so yeah, any last words?
For me, no, I look forward to seeing some of you. It's nice seeing, I haven't seen this many people looking at me in a long, long time.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. This was wonderful.
Thank you all for
Tillman.
coming, for taking a
Just
few
Yeah.
quick
minutes of your.
question.
Pardon?
The class is from 6 to 7, 6 to 8. What
6
is
to
it?
about
6 to
7:30.
30, about
6 to
7:30.
It's about it's an hour and a half class. He'll also be doing critiques during the week, so folks can share their work and have him look at it as well.
Right, good. Thank
And
you.
I will, every week before class, I'll send you out basically notes that I will be covering in class. So you don't have to be scribbling during class while we go through all of these things.
Good idea.
So that it'll go through and hand out. So the way I hope the class will work is the first meeting will go through the iPhone and all of the options of setting it up exactly the way you want it to be set. The second week, and I'm hoping you'll shoot some images, send a few in, depends on how big the class is. I'll select a few, and we'll go through the editing, both in the Apple format, and if there's interest, we'll take some and go into Snapseed and begin to look at the editing in those. And then each week after that, 1 week, we'll talk about composition and design. You'll send me a few images, we'll edit them, and then I'll lecture about the next topic. And we'll go on that way. So hopefully half the class will be looking at your images and talking about the editing of them. And then the other half will be me talking about another aspect of photography.
All right, cool. Thank you, Tillman, so much. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank
showing up.
you.
And we hope to see you either online or in Italy. Who knows?
Love to see you in Florence. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend,
ciao,
folks.
everybody.
Bye-bye.